I love you guys. I love you guys. Oh boy. Are you kidding me? That was unreal. And you got to know something. Those of you that know my dad, and most of you do, that was one of the highlights of coming to this church. And Dad is smiling right now. And I just got to point that out, Vicki. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for coming today. And it's a big day for us. I just got to get this out. Normally, my dad would sit in the front and watch me and occasionally doze off, which was a nonverbal to me to pick it up, buddy. Pick it up. Come on. There's some of us over 90 that can't handle this slowness right here, okay? So pick it up. But I've always been used to him watching me. And so this is altogether a different feeling. I'm just going to say it, okay? I'm a little nervous, Dad. I hope I do it okay. Wow, what a day and what a privilege to have you here. I'm Steve McCracken. I'm Larry's youngest son, and I was just here about 3 hours ago preaching, and multiple people said, "You're kidding me, you're going to preach, and then you're going to come back and do this." And I just want to clear the air about a couple of things. Number one, they were right. I didn't know I would give so much of my voice in the morning. You would think I've only done this 43 years. Hello. But the other part of it, and the reason I'm here this afternoon, not sitting where you are, but standing where I am, is I can't imagine not standing here. And it's probably will go down as one of the great privileges of my life to stand before people and tell them that their impressions of my dad were right. And our treasured impressions, not only impressions, but realities that the McCrackens have when it comes to our dad. And so thanks for coming. That means a lot. And it's been quite a while, quite some time, that my dad has asked God to send the bus. And I don't know, I'd love a show of hands if you were here the Sunday I was done preaching and about to head down. I thought, it's like the Holy Spirit said, let him pray you out. So I walked down there with a mic, grabbed the mic, walked down where Caesar's sitting. And I said, Dad, would you just kind of pray us out and bless us as we leave today? So I how many of you were here that day? You'll remember it fondly because it became kind of a signature thing for Dad. And so I handed him the mic, and sure enough, he went to prayer and didn't stand, but he just sat there and was praying. And about halfway into his prayer, he said, Lord, great sermon. This was amazing. I'm so glad I came. Best way I could spend Sunday morning. But there's a pause. Lord, I've been asking you this for quite some time. And now's as good a time as any because you can hear me with the microphone. And by now, more than a few are starting to kind of look. How you're supposed to close your eyes. We're looking down, and people are looking up. And he says, Lord, I'm not complaining. Don't get me wrong, but when are you going to send the bus? And I'm sitting there thinking, because it wasn't really talked a lot about at that point, and I'm thinking, Dad, what bus? The bus, Lord, I keep asking you. I'm done here. It's over. It's time to come home. Would you just send the bus? By now, people are laughing out loud and having a blast. And finally, he ended his prayer, and people filed by. I said, Dad, you got to come to the door. People are going to love to have a visit with you. And the most common words I heard at the door were, "Save me a seat, Larry." Isn't that great? It's really cool. It's really cool. It really happened that way. And on April 28th, just a little over a month ago, Dad turned for home, and he is now face to face with Jesus Christ. Amen. And you know what? The bus finally came. And it came on time, and it came according to plan. In fact, a bonus blessing is right this moment. Dad is experiencing something we talked a lot about, and he's experiencing it firsthand. So as much as we try to imagine, the Bible says we only see through a mirror dimly, but then we shall see face to face. And it's a more intimate image, isn't it? It's what my dad gets to do. And when he saw Jesus face to face, there was this grand smile across the crowd, a welcome home celebration, a party thrown by Jesus and attended by, I can name a lot of people. My brother is one, my mother is another, my uncle, actually two of my uncles, and my aunt, and a whole host of other people that have left this life were there going, dude, pretty cool bus. I said, it's all right, Larry, that's a good thing. No wonder what I just described to you, the Bible declares is, with these words, precious in the sight of the Lord is what happened on the 28th, the death of a godly one. And if you think about it, take in that celebration scene that I took a moment to try to imagine out loud with you. And you'd be hard-pressed, too, to come up with any better word than precious. It truly is precious, after all these years, to have what you've longed for with the people you've longed to be with. And that's, in fact, the case for Dad. So today, we gather, and we want to capture something here that I don't think will be hard to do at all. Because you're Larry people, I know that. And that means the smiles are for real, and your laughter is not, fake laugh, it's the real stuff. That's Grandpa, that's Dad, that's whether you knew him as Dr. Larry McCracken, or some of you knew him as Honcho. I guess I could ask for a show of hands. How many Dr. Larry McCrackens you're not going to raise your hand after I went. But he was Dr. Lauren Dwight McCracken. He was also Honcho. Yep, look at that. Tadmore lives on. And then, of course, he was Larry. How many knew him just as Larry? How many were corrected when you tried to get too formal and he said, no, it's just call me Larry even. That'll work. My wife is holding her hand up. That was a learning curve. That's not what we do. And anyway, and then whether you're just one that knows him as Grandpa or Dad. And we're here to honor someone who quite simply God was able to reach through and touch many of us and leave a mark on our lives that, I'm just going to say it, I stand at this podium on lots of memorials. And I stand at it on memorials where some people are quite elderly. But there's a corresponding relationship between their age and how many people, frankly, are still alive to celebrate. So I see a room full of people, and it to me is a silent signal, powerful one, that Dad truly had a touch in your life as well. And if you're part of Grace Point currently or in years in the last 15 years, you can say with your voice, it's true. God reached through Larry and touched me. And that's really a cool thing. So my permission is in front of you to enjoy this hour and really do things like smile like you're doing, sniffle back a tear, that's okay. And let's not forget to laugh. Let's just let ourselves go a little bit and have a good laugh. And I have a pretty good hunch Dad will be laughing too. So that's how it goes. So let me start us off. I want to begin right now the way I began this day, and it's the same way I have begun literally every day for the last 60 years. I know I don't look that old. Some of you are doing the math right now. He's a pastor since 43 years. How does that work? I started in middle school, so get over it, okay? That's good. No, the truth is, I did today what I've always done every morning, and that is I sit down in a chair in our family room, and I have my Bible open on my lap, and I have a cup of coffee. It's quite muggish in size. It's big. And I spend time alone with God. I say that not to call attention to anything in me, but I hopefully have sparked a question in you. Why? Why would you do that? And my answer is very simple, because I watched my dad do it. That is my answer. It has always been my answer. Every day that I have a memory of, all the way back literally to our young childhood, I remember coming down, little boy, kind of ready for the day, and I look over there, and Dad, he wasn't weird about it. He would close his Bible and start to engage. His boys here, his girls here, whatever. But I remember vividly, and I've seen it all along the way, Dad still spends time with God daily. So if you're doing the math, 6 decades is the correct number. For 6 decades, that part of his life modeled something for me that made sense, and frankly, if I can be honest, has changed 100% of who I am. Completely. So important was his daily time alone with God. Dad had a legacy question. I'm tempted to ask the Tadmore crew this question, and I don't know how good our memories are back then, but you heard it. If you heard it once, you heard it 100 times as a staffer or somebody at Tadmore. And it's the question. He just asked the question in passing, sometimes waiting for an answer, other times just wanting it to linger. And it was the question, have you been in the Word today? So I thought, since he's watching, let me ask you, have you been in the Word today? Okay, it's just a question. No one, we're not going around the room. You don't have to sign in or something. But here's the deal. My dad had, and it showed. It really did. Now, if you haven't, there's just a simple suggestion he would often follow with. And he would wait and get your attention and have a smile with it, and then say, there's still time. Isn't that good? So, 8 years ago, I wrote a letter to my dad. It was on the occasion of a birthday for him. He was 85 years old at the time. And I have kept that letter close. I gave him a copy, of course, but I kept it close because I thought, every so often I want to pull that out and see if it's still true. And I can tell you today, he was 93 and some months. It was true of him till his day came and the bus took him home. And so I thought, what better people to share that with than to try to make it up right now. And I share it with you for a simple reason. It remained true of his life throughout. It's entitled, Still Proud to Call You Dad. Seldom does a week go by where someone doesn't mention to me the incredible way my dad, Dr. Larry McCracken, touched their life. It's kind of normal for me to hear someone say, your dad is amazing. I've often thought to myself, you're right, but you only have a small window of why he's amazing. With remarkable consistency, my father remains the most steadfast example of walking with God daily that I have ever known. I just want that to stay with you. It stayed with me. Most people I know, and I'm one of them, to confess my sin in front of all of you, have an in-season and an out-of-season episode every so often when it comes to me and God. I want to be on all the time, but there's times when I'm just like dry or empty or something's awry. Not so much my dad, or else he was a better actor than I perceived him to be. He knew God. That's where it started. And he loved God. And he lived for God. And now if I can switch that last sentence, he lives with God. And still back to the letter. He said this to me a lot, almost apologetically. He said, Steve, ministry is harder than it has ever been. To be a pastor is the hardest work it's ever been. And perhaps that's true. But as a pastor with a dad like mine, as I like saying to people who say, tell me about your dad, I say, well, let's start with he was roommates with Moses in college. Okay? So that somewhat dates my dad, but also explains some of the wisdom and richness of his life. I cannot recall facing, this is a little of my cheat sheet. This is a little bit of pull the curtain back and let people know why you've been at this church 30 years. And, why 43 years? That's not unheard of, but it's not the norm. So why is that? And a big part of my answer is him. What God did for me, and I want you to just sort of imagine this. To this day, my dad is that guy that I could go to and say, Dad, look, I'm in a pickle. I've got myself in some deep water, or there's a problem I don't know how to fix, which for a pastor comes up quite a bit. So you look to somebody. Now imagine if that somebody is your dad. First of all, he's local. Secondly, and I like this and he liked this, it's free. Okay? And I honestly, I don't have a time when he went, beats me, no clue. Good luck to you though, bro. That was not my dad. He either had a spot-on piece of wisdom, or he could point to a situation where it worked out and give me some sort of hands-on help. That was my dad, and it's a lot of my story as well. And I want you to know this, though some of you who are part of Western Seminary, which was his last, what do we say in rock music, gig? His last hitch of ministry was at Western Seminary. My dad, at 88 years old, worked longer and harder than any human being I've ever known, half his age. Not kidding. He would grab the mic right now and go, Steve, that was going too far. He would. I was in an audience where he said, look, I'm not the sinless guy my son thinks I am. That was actually a miss on my part. I shouldn't have been there with, constantly. That's his to tell, not mine. But my dad worked hard, is my point, and he modeled that for me. But mostly I want you to know I love my dad for being there for me. He's always given me a sense that he's proud of me. And he actually convinced me, if only my dad could put it this way, that he would have attended my church and listened to my messages even if I wasn't the pastor. That's how he put it to me. So I just got to tell you this. I was scared to ask him if that was really true. He's just trying to make me feel good. And I didn't wait for an answer, which means I'm still holding that conviction that he would have attended this church if I wasn't the guy. And I'm going to live happily ever after believing that. That's the kind of guy he was in my life. All the way until the last Sunday, he was able to be in the front row when I preach. And I've mentioned that. I guess in a sense there's an appropriate empty chair. I would step down And you give it all. You preach hard. You lose your voice in the process. You're passionate about what you're saying. Somebody great said, if you want people to remember you as a pastor, just light yourself on fire and they'll come and watch you burn. So it drives the bus for me. Oh, pardon the bus statement. So my dad, he would wait till I sat down, and the worship team would reset, and we'd have a kind of a follow-up with song, and there would be this very familiar arm coming around my shoulder. And I would hear these words, "Steve, that was the best sermon I've ever heard in my life." And I believed him. I guess you could say my dad was proud of me, but not near as proud as I am to stand here and speak about Dad. And this isn't, I don't mean to be weird, but I love you, Dad. And I'm going to miss him. Just last week, while spending time in my Bible with my coffee alone, came across a great statement. 5 words. In 2 Chronicles, chapter 20, it's 1 Chronicles, rather. And it describes the guy that I've teased about being roommates with Dad, Moses. 5 words. Moses was a man of God. That was it. Moses, the man of God. So today I'd like to respectfully modify a single word in that 5-word set. Larry McCracken, a man of God. That's what I want to say on his behalf. Now for some facts and figures. Lauren Dwight McCracken was born March 10th, 1930. Somebody pointed out earlier, 3 times 10 is 30. How cool is that? He was born the middle child and only son of Bud and Mary McCracken. We knew them affectionately as Mimi and Graham. Larry had an older sister, Shirley, who's hanging with Dad now again, and a younger sister, Aunt Patty, who's wonderfully here today, and so good to have you, Auntie. And both, I should add, both Aunt Shirley and Aunt Patty served Jesus too. It was in the DNA. And they saw a great model in my dad, so it all worked together. After graduating from Montebello High School, he attended Westmont College up in Santa Barbara, or for us, down in Santa Barbara, where he met and married our mother, Nancy Louise Quintel McCracken. They were married for nearly 70 years when my mom wouldn't like the bus image for her, but the Lord called her home. A couple of years ago, almost to the month, actually. After graduating from Westmont, Larry did some graduate studies at Wheaton College, just outside of Chicago, and later received an MDiv from Western Seminary, right here locally in Portland. His earliest ministry was as youth pastor, one time a little hitch in Corvallis, as I understand it, and then on down in Manhattan Beach, down off the coast in Southern California, or at the coast, and later, not so lovely surroundings, but my apologies, San Bernardino, California, which is really hot, like a furnace. But we were there for a little while, and now the family numbered 5, including the caboose, that would be me. And we moved to Oakland, about 419 miles north. And in Oakland, my dad joined the staff of Melrose Baptist Church, 47th Avenue and Bond Street, and that's where we kind of grew up in many ways in Oakland. He was the director of Christian education, which will come up in most circles still because he was kind of legendary in that regard. He then founded and birthed a ministry known as Caravans for Christ, which I'd be curious, any caravanners here? Dave, and you'll hear from Dave in a minute. But there are others, and my apologies to sound like it's just us in this crowd. There are many, many more people outside watching live stream, and we're glad you're here. Sorry, that's so incredibly rude of me. All right, but we're glad you're here too. So, caravanners are scattered all over the place. It gave birth later to a thing called Summer Service Corps. Any Summer Service Corps folks? Okay, right here in Oregon, but I jump ahead. And then, still at the same church, Melrose Dad became the senior pastor for the last several years before the first, he and Mom got an outreach from a group here in Oregon known as Conservative Baptist Association of Oregon. And that day, it was a one-state region, and it was a big one. It was the largest in the country as a group of churches, of which this is one, a member church. So he agreed to come, and when he made his way north, he came as the person that was brought on to help Sunday schools and churches develop Christian education programs all across Oregon. It was during that same time that a group known as Scripture Press Foundation tapped my dad's shoulder, and that's when he began to travel the world doing consulting work and was gone a whole lot. He was in lots of places and making big impact. CBA of Oregon was a good fit. The headquarters down in Salem, and that began a 30-year relationship on their staff in wearing a variety of hats along the way. One of those hats was Camp Tadmor. At that time, Tadmor was not the premier camp that it is today, but in those days it was kind of struggling and working to get ahead of steam and good things going on, but more that could happen, and Dad said, sure. And they said, well, can you run the camp? And everybody adopts a name. His adopted name from a lot of campers was Honcho, like head honcho. And so he did that and loved that work, and eventually, he is, how many know my dad to be a tightwad? Just say it, raise your hand. Cheapskate, okay? He is a Scotchman. If you don't know that, what that means, I didn't know. I said, Dad, what's the big deal about a Scotchman? Son, glad you asked. Do you know how the Grand Canyon came into being? I said, no, Dad, how did it come into being? A Scotchman lost a nickel. There it goes. And you laughed like I laughed when I first heard that. It was really cool. But Dad, as the Scotchman, couldn't resist the impulse to say, wait a minute, we're not being very efficient with kingdom dollars here in the Conservative Baptist Association of Oregon. And there are 3 other states that conveniently fit together: Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska. Well, that's what happened. He put it in front of people, and there was embrace, and the result was the birth of a new organization, the Conservative Baptist Northwest, CB Northwest. And it wasn't long after that that the entire nation turned to regions rather than state offices. So it was a really cool, something that he was humbled by and really glad for, because it was putting more kingdom dollars right where they're needed, reaching people with the gospel of Jesus. That's what we're here for, right? So that was a really cool kind of thing. He was awarded, before I say that, I want to tell you as one of the member churches, there were 300 churches in this region. There were about 74,000 Conservative Baptists if you added them all up in all the local churches. It's a big group. And it was that region where most of those pastors who had problems like the son of my dad, they needed somebody to talk to. And he was that guy. And they would call him, and he became the pastor to pastors. And our new leader there is James Gleason, and he's got the same vision and same heart to be a pastor to pastors. Go get him. You're going to hear from James in just a second, too. Then Dad was awarded an honorary doctorate at Western Seminary for his life work in church growth and church planting. And he completed that long list that I tried to cover quickly. He completed those assignments when he was 88 years old. Even if I didn't know all of those details, if I was you sitting there listening, I would be asking, so what's the secret? What's his sauce? I mean, really, what is it that gave him the drive to do all of that for that long? And the answer is best explained in song, a song we're going to present to you now. Randy and Kelly Trout are going to come. It's, I'm going to call it his testimony song, Dad's testimony song. As they're coming to join us, I can tell you that Tadmore, the caravan group, they would travel all over the country sharing the gospel, and they slept in churches on the floor. And most of them will remember a song, this song, that was their wake-up song every morning, sung by Honcho, loud enough to where the neighborhood could hear it. But it'll be far more pleasant now. Thanks for leading in this song, He Touched Me. Thank you, you guys. It's awesome. You know, I did hear Dad walk the halls early in the morning in those churches, and it didn't sound anything like that. I will spare you the details, but it's a memory that I saw therapy about for a long time. No, it was just a wonderful song. Um, as the expression goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And the visual scrapbook that you're about to see was created by a friend of ours. She was our children's ministry director here. Her and her husband, Jamie and Stephen Chase, have moved north of Seattle. But they're watching, and I love you guys and appreciate that you put this together, Jamie. But I want to call attention to one sentence she said to me when I reached out and said, she has such talent in that area, could you possibly put this scrapbook together? And her words were, he was always so encouraging to me in ministry. And a significant influence on my family, the Chase family. Wonderful heart from which you get to enjoy the fruit of her labor. Let's enjoy this wonderful scrapbook of legacy from my dad. I I watched it 2 other times to try to get this out of me. uh, there were 3 of us McCracken kids. My big sister Sue, my big brother Glenn, who's hanging with Dad. He's and Mom in heaven. So it's my privilege, really a great honor, to invite my amazing sister, Sue, to come on up and help me out. So this is my sister Sue. You're going to hang right here. I'll get this.
Can I? Okay. Wow. We should have done this before that. I have this special place in my dad's life of being the only daughter. I was definitely the little girl that thought her father was the most important man and the best father in the whole world. That admiration for my father never lessened as I got older. And if you were to talk to anybody that knew me, it would be apparent that I held my father in high regard. His influence on my life was profound. And there's a line from a song that when I first heard the song many years ago, I thought that line it explains who my father was to me. And that line is, "You are the wind beneath my wings." And he was that, especially when it came to working with youth. My father had a passion for youth that he carried all the way through his entire ministry. And his work with youth was definitely instrumental in shaping me. It became my heart as well, and just like Steve, my career with youth for 40 plus years, which is without a doubt a testament to my father's wind beneath my wings. For me, Caravans for Christ, under my father's leadership, was where my desire to work with youth was developed. One of my memories of many caravans trips that I went on was during a vacation Bible school in Idaho. I was a senior in high school, and my dad put me in charge of one of the vacation Bible schools that we were doing throughout the area. And it happened to be one of the smaller schools because this was a new experience for me. And if you were ever a caravaner, you know that my dad was always challenging us to work out of our comfort zone. So here we go. Well, in true Larry McCracken style, my dad decided we are going to have a space theme, and we're going to turn the church, and it was about this size, into a space center. Okay, Dad. So anyway, he set out, and he had wires that went all the length of the church, and these rockets that would go back and forth. And then he rolls in with this big machine box, and it had dials on it and buttons, and it would make all this static. And then pretty soon, a voice would come through like we were really talking to outer space. Well, I'm telling you, that was back when, that's in the early 70s. There was no technology. So how he pulled this off, I still don't know how he did that. But I'll tell you, the kids, they were convinced that we were talking to outer space in this vacation Bible school. And word spread, and I'm telling you, the next couple of days, our little school went to several hundred kids. And I just tell you that story because that was the genius of my father, to say the least. I learned so much from him. This kind of thing I saw my father do over and over again, and it influenced deeply into my life. His knowledge, his enthusiasm, just his joy in creating experiences, meaningful experiences for youth was contagious, and I'm just so grateful for the hands-on learning that I got to have under his wings. My dear father is now at home with the Lord and Savior he loves so much. And even in his last weeks, he was so at peace with going home to Jesus. I was there for the last 3 weeks of his life, living outside his room. And it was a precious gift to me from a loving Lord that knows his children so well, and he knew how important and how much that would come to mean to me. One of the things that my father and I did over those weeks is we would listen and sing to old hymns. He loved the old hymns, I loved the old hymns, and I had brought a little portable speaker and I'd blast it out. And the best part of singing over and over again was watching my dad just put his hands in the air, and he would just direct the music. And, towards the end, they didn't go as high, but he continued to direct the music. And I know he's got some job there in heaven doing that. But worshiping through music is definitely one of the memories, the sweet memories I'll take away. On many days, too, and I know you've heard a lot about this, he wanted to talk about the bus, so we were going to talk about the bus. He really liked the image of getting on this bus to heaven. He had prayed for it, and he was earnestly waiting. And so he would say things like, how many people do you think are going to be on this bus? And Sue, are you sure that the bus can get to the parking lot outside where we're living here? Yeah, Dad, we can. And then I want to make sure that I'm on the bus. There's all Christians, right? I'm going to be on the all Christian bus. Dad. And then he wanted to talk about the people that so-and-so from families that he's going to be able to stop and talk to on the way. And then finally one day he said, I'm going to make sure that they have communion bread when I get on the bus. And I waited, and I'm thinking he's going to want to know where the communion wine is too, but nope, not my dad. Bread, but no wine. Anyway, those are just fun conversations that were just so endearing in those last weeks. I have almost 40 pages of journal from those last weeks, which document for me such a treasured time, for sure. But I have to say that sitting outside or next to the bedside of a dying saint who truly loves Jesus is a deeply holy time. The sweet presence of the Holy Spirit was there in so many ways, day after day. And those are the things that most fill the pages of my journal. And I know people in this audience, I talked to several women even this morning, I just know you know exactly what I'm talking about. I close with Schultz. And Schultz, he was a creator of Snoopy. And my dad loved the Snoopy characters. I have actually a big bag of letters and cards from over the years that my dad has sent me. And it is amazing how many of them are Snoopy cards. Well, Schultz, he had just finished writing a letter, his last cartoon, to his friends, and it was a farewell to his friends, and then he died that night in his chair. And what it made me think of is, what would my dad's farewell be? What would he want to say? And as I processed that, I thought, it is just so simple. My dad had just a few themes that he lived his life by, and as I listened to my brother, we didn't talk about any of this, but he's saying those themes, and those themes just don't go away. And he desired these, he lived these every day of his life, and he desired them for others. First was stay in the Word. Make sure you get connected to a church community. Love life. Work hard. And you can't complain. That was the next one. You can't, no complaining. See the humor in things. Value people and enjoy people. And the most important was love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. that's what my dad would have wanted to say as a farewell. My dad lived well, and he died well, and I'm going to miss my dad very much.
You're so awesome, Sue. I love you. Here, I'll help you down. Wow. I mentioned earlier that Aunt Patty is here. Her and Kathy and Dan, all from my dad's younger sister's family, are here. And what a thrill, what a joy to have you here, Auntie. And she too was part of the final weeks. You saw them hugging in a picture or two there, and that was an earlier field trip, I guess you could call it, where I brought Dad down, and they live in Southern Cal and Whittier, and they traveled around to their childhood homes, and they stood in front of them in some of those pictures. It was just magic to be there and watch that, because all the cousins, there's 10 of us that heard stories of, all these places, got to see it and see them standing in front of it like kids all over again. It was just really magic. But last couple of weeks before Dad turned for home, we decided, Sue and I said, hey, we could FaceTime. Let's set it up so Auntie can be on her end and Dad will be here in Tigard. And we did. And it was a wonderful exchange between two people that had so much history and such incredible love for each other. And I just held the phone steady because that was my job, and just listened. And Auntie would say things, and Dad would say things in reply. And Auntie asked if I would share just a couple of those things that were shared between her and her big brother. And so Auntie said this, I don't know if I would get to tell you, didn't know if I would get to tell you, Larry, that before you turn to be with Jesus, but I want you to know, from my earliest memories that I have, I've always been so proud to say, you're my big brother. He's my big brother. I did the math. I'm not going to give away your age. That's a no-no, Auntie. But that's quite a statement, since Auntie's respect and esteem for her big brother spanned over 80 years. 80 years. So she went through all the teen years and all that stuff that everybody goes through and goes, brother, I don't have a brother. What's potentially. And it was real. And was real to the last days of my dad's earthly life. For the record, it took my sister a lot longer to feel that way about me, but anyway, just a thought. So, Auntie, you also shared how my dad, your brother, was such an encouraging person to you when you were pursuing Jesus. She's a graduate of Biola University and had a heart for ministry, and my dad was right there nudging her. Patty, go for it. You've got a lot to say. You're a great voice to listen to and an influence. And not only Aunt Patty, but Aunt Shirley, they have ministries. They were engaged in the work of the Lord until the Lord of the work called them home. So, and Auntie, thank you for letting me share some of this with the folks. We've made a big deal today, I understand, for Larry's legacy, my dad's legacy, our dad's legacy in ministry. And as such, it seemed appropriate to invite a couple of leaders from those places where he invested lots of years to share maybe a little bit of their experience of my dad's legacy. And the first one I want to invite up is Dave Berts, who actually, aside from Sue and I, know Dad the longest. He was at Melrose when he met my dad, and then came with Dad to Oregon and have been here ever since. This is Dave Berts. He's the director of or was until recently, newly retired Director of Operations at CB Northwest in Business Matters. But Dave, we're childhood friends, and here we stand, right?
Wow.
It's all yours, buddy.
I didn't think this was going to be really hard until he had you guys sing that song, and I kind of lost it because that so much of my life is tied up in the experiences during that time. My story with Larry began 61 years ago, as Sue and Steve said, when the family moved to Oakland, to Melrose Baptist. I was a third-generation member of that church. And so when they arrived, Sue and Glenn and Steve became my friends, and Larry became a real personal and spiritual influence in my life. In fact, I didn't know it at the time, but after my parents and my grandfather, who was an incredibly godly man, Larry has definitely had the most significant impact on my life and helped make me who I am today. Like Sue and Steve both talked about, he developed a program in the late 60s, early 70s called Caravans for Christ. We traveled all over the West Coast into Canada, did evangelism, backyard Bible clubs, vacation Bible schools, did music, all kinds of things. And that's commonplace now. Probably this church is doing it, I don't know. But churches do these travel camps all the time. In 1966, 7, 8, it just was unheard of to put a bunch of high school students and college students in a van and take them halfway across the country with like 2 leaders, like Larry and John. Yeah. And that was about it. Yeah. And we had some incredible ministry in churches, but what I learned somewhat then and understand better now, Larry used those times to develop us as leaders, to speak into us, to create servant leaders out of a bunch of unruly high school and college students. I would say that who I am as a leader and what I try and instill in others got its foundation during those days. And I try and instill that in others, and it's replicating the things that I learned from Larry. In 1973, as you've also heard, Larry and the family moved to Oregon to take a position with CBA of Oregon. And so there I was in California, high school senior, and I'm like, okay, well, that was great, but that's that. Larry had other ideas. And so towards the end of my senior year, I got a phone call, and Larry said, so I just heard from God. And he had this red telephone in his desk drawer, and he believed that it was a direct connection to God. And so God's will for your life this summer is to come to Oregon and help me work this camp. Now, Steve made it sound like this was something Larry wanted to do. Like, oh yeah, this was one of the things. That isn't what I heard. No. So I don't know anything about running a camp. I can do things in a church, but I don't know about a camp. So there was about 5 or 6 of us that had been involved in leadership in the Caravans for Christ program that came up from California to Oregon to work at camp that summer. And if you were around in the early 70s, you understand that Californians with longish hair and from the San Francisco Bay Area were not particularly welcome in Oregon. And so it was an interesting summer. But that summer, again, was transformational in my life. And out of that summer and summers that followed on full-time and summer staff, led me into ministry that has been about or connected to camp ever since then, most of my adult life. Larry, just like Caravans, used the ministry to the staff that would come, Summer Service Corps, Summer Ministry Team, to develop that servant leadership and to do discipleship as much with those of us that were serving as to the campers and churches that we served. Larry had some really unique ways of communicating spiritual truths. And one that I remember rather vividly is whenever you were in the car with Larry, and if you were looking for a place to park, and you could not find a place to park, that meant there was sin in the car. The thing of it is, it was never him. I also learned in traveling with Larry that you can't bring coffee to his table quick enough if you're in a restaurant. That's just a little aside for those of you who know him. It was during the summer of 1978. I had just been invited to come on staff at Tadmor full-time. And during that summer, I met Jennifer, and we were having a great time, and I told Larry about it, and he had a lot to say about that. Made me be very careful about how I conducted myself. But in the end, Larry's counsel was really helpful in setting our relationship on the right track. Larry officiated at our wedding. He also officiated at my dad's memorial, and so, as you can see, our lives have been intertwined for most of my conscious life, I think. But anyway, he did our service, and when we got to the part, when he got to the do you take, he said, "Do you, Big Bird, take Pooh Bear," using our camp names in the service. I have a tape of this, you know, it's not like I was imagining it. And after that, we became Bird Pooh. So you gotta love the man, right? You just have to. So about a year after we were married, we got another one of those God's will for your life phone calls. I asked him if he still had the red phone. He said, yeah, of course. And so he said that what was going to happen is that Jennifer and I were going to move to Idaho, and we were going to run Daystar Conference Center, which was a small conference center that CB Northwest had acquired that year. Who can argue? I mean, it's the red phone, right? And so we went over there. We had 3 incredible years of ministry. Again, had an opportunity to have Larry speaking into our lives, and it was just phenomenal. I had the real privilege of visiting with Larry about 3 months ago. No, maybe a little more, but when he was still very aware, and we had great conversation. Talked about many of the experiences we'd had over the years. And I could spend hours and hours telling you those stories because they've all been influential in my life. I saw that his sense of humor had not diminished one bit, and his care for others had not diminished one bit. And so out of all those stories would reflect the gratitude that I have that God brought Larry into my life and for the influence that he had on me and my wife and my family and my friends. It's just been incredible. So Steve, Sue, thanks for letting me share today. It's been a real privilege.
You're awesome, man. You're awesome. Thanks, man. So you know he would ask you, have you been in the Word today?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good, buddy, good. There's next chapter in Dad's life was when he led the CB Northwest at that time. It's since become the Church Venture, so you got to work your letters. CB to CV, okay? Church Venture Northwest, and the new executive director, not so new, he's been here a year or two, is James Gleason. And James, you're next up to give us a little sense. It wasn't just, you're not speaking officially as the executive director as much as a pastor like me, that the Lord said, hey, I got another plan for you, and here you are doing the job my dad did. Big shoes to fill, I guess you'd say.
They are, and I want you to know that every once in a while when Larry and I would be on the phone, I would ask him what it was like to be at your son's church, because one of these days my sons might grow up to be pastor, and he said he was always proud and your sermons were great. He liked them better when he preached them, though. That's exactly what Larry said.
All right,
many times over.
the truth comes out, James. The truth comes out.
I joined the Conservative Baptist family in the summer of 1994 when I showed up at my church in Hillsboro, Sunrise Baptist Church. And it was just a quick moment till I ended up at the ministry center over on Halsey. And this operation was crazy. It was flying. There were people everywhere. There were offices. There was a big office. There was Larry's office. And it was exciting to see the director, the executive director, and deciding to see that he cared about a youth pastor like me. And there'd always be things going on, and you'd head over there, and it's just like a circus almost. It was just activity, and there were offices, and there were things going on. And yet he always made time for me. And I remember when I was thinking about transitioning in '98 to be the senior pastor of my church, and I went over to see him, and he bought me lunch. And we talked a little bit, and he believed in me. He said, you could do that. I really believe you can do that. There was something about your dad that would instill hope in people, that would breathe life into people. And he encouraged me to do that and said, you would do a good job at that. And that meant a lot to me for a guy like Larry with all that responsibility in charge of such a big organization to say something like that. And as I stepped into senior ministry, I'd been a youth pastor 9 years, but youth pastors know nothing, right? I mean, I was one. And then I'm a senior pastor of a church, and I remember calling up, or he would call up, and I would go over there, or he would call and say, hey, I'm going to be in the area. And this was Larry. He would meet me at a restaurant, Red Robin or something like that, and he had already been at a booth working on something, and he would get up and he'd give me a hug, and he'd say, what are you working on that's exciting? What are you doing? And he really cared. It shocked me that a guy at that level would care about just one of the guys in the organization and in the churches. And he would listen, and he would encourage me, and then he'd tell me what he's doing, of course, because he was always doing something. Yeah. He was doing a lot of somethings at once. And what I loved about that was that I left a better man than when I walked into the restaurant, because he spoke into me, and he believed in me. When the executive team, the trustees of CB Northwest, reached out to me about becoming the executive director, I wasn't so sure about that. And I went to see Larry at his office at Western. It was actually his last week at the seminary there. I didn't know that. And I show up, and he's packing things up. And it was still quiet. They would just ask me, and I went to Larry, the guy that I thought would know best. And I told him about it. And I said, they've asked me to become the executive director. What do you think about that? Of course, I know exactly what he said was, I believe in you. You would do good at that. I think you're the right man for the job. And so I just asked his advice. And he said, do it. He said, God will use you. And again, I always feel young with a guy like your dad. I mean, I remember one day he came to my church. It was like 2010. And he came in, and the secretary called me and said, hey, there's an elderly gentleman, which was not a good thing to say. And I went up and I tried to defend him, and he said, well, I'm 80 today. And I'm like, well, I think that qualifies. He showed up at my office on his 80th birthday to sell me something. I don't know what it was. It was great. It was awesome. And so I go to his office at Western Seminary, and I tell him this, and I said, this is really in private. I don't know yet, and I didn't know he had a red phone, but he probably pulled it out at that moment. And he said, you should do it. And he said, I've got 3 pieces of advice for you, and I wrote these down. He said, number 1, pray. Your number 1 job is to pray for all the pastors and pray for all the churches. Never stop praying for those people. He said, number 2, you go out there and encourage them, which is what he did to me. So I knew what that meant. He said, you drive around and you go out and you spend time in their offices at their turf. And number 3, raise lots of money. And that's not the half of it, that's for sure. Raise lots of money. And I wrote those down, and I remember coming back to tell my wife, and I just thought, it was once again, this guy spoke into my life, and it meant so much to me. When I joined the CB family 29 years ago, every year Larry would take the whole crew, everybody around, and they called it a dog and pony show, is what they told me. But he would take the whole staff of the Northwest CBA, the directors and leaders of this and that, and we'd go to a church. He'd show up once a year at a church and an association, and there was a whole day of insurance and retirement and all these things, but it was always an update. And I'm a new guy, and I'd never had this before, and what I loved was the fact that he would always cast vision through that. And he'd always show up and bring people that mattered and speak into us and give us a book and a free lunch. And most pastors will do anything for a book and a free lunch, right? But it inspired me. And it made me feel like I was a part of something bigger than just my little church. And I really, really loved that. And when I became executive director, that's the first thing we did. We started going around. We've been doing it, 4, maybe 5 years now in the fall. And I love that because it reminds me that the real work is out there in the churches. It's not in an office. Larry encouraged me at significant seasons of my life and in between. And I'm a better man because of that. And I would have never taken this next position if Larry hadn't spoken into me. But I'm thankful for your dad's role in my life. So thank you, my friend. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, James. Thanks. You're terrific. Okay, James, I'll ask him. He wants to pass on offering plate right now. Is that going to be a problem for anybody? True Larry McCracken inspiration right there. Robert Jones is next up, and he's from Western Seminary, where Dad was given a doctorate, where Dad worked, served, ministered as alumni and something else. You're church relations, and you're the advancement guy, senior vice president, and the president of the seminary is here as well today, Chuck. And so give us a little shot, man. And I remember meeting Randy, mostly at Dad's retirement party, kind of a little Mexican restaurant that he loved, and we all went there, and yeehaw,
I remember
right?
that.
So tell us a little bit.
Steve, when your text pinged, I was in my office, and I was working on something that afforded me the opportunity to stop when I saw your text about Larry passing. And it was an immediate sense of sadness that just kind of washed over me. And I started to think about him. And as I thought of him, I started to smile. Because you saw the pics, right? All those pics, Larry was smiling.
Yeah.
So thank you for the opportunity to share. I'm honored. You were talking about having fun. So in the spirit of having fun, I was told that I could wear a sport coat or a dress shirt or spandex. And I cycled, and Larry cycled, and I'm like, so I wrote you back, and I said, Pastor Bromeister, spandex it is.
You see this? This is relief on my face, right?
Yeah, but you're echoing forward, Larry, right? The joy of life. So I made some phone calls, talked to a few folks around campus, and I said, tell me about Larry. And folks shared. And I took my thoughts. When I arrived at the seminary, I asked, who do I need to talk to? And you got to talk to Larry. Now, on paper, Larry reported to me, right? I got to put that in air quotes. He was too seasoned. I never saw Larry reporting to me. And I would go to his office and I would say, Larry, tell me stories about the school. What do I need to know? And he would start way back. And he would just echo forward these stories of life. And I would say, talk to me about the church in the region. And he would tell me stories. And he'd tell me stories about the denomination and stories about churches and pastors and things that I needed to know about the school. And then it was, Larry, who do I need to see? And Larry had a caseload of about 130 people. So a gentleman in his late 80s had a caseload of 130 people. And he didn't have to look them up on the computer. He just told me stories. And he could say the names and the spouses and the churches. And he would say, you need to go see these churches in Washington. And they were lined up. And you need to go see this pastor over on the other side of the Cascades. You need to go see this individual as a rancher. I think it was in Idaho. And you can't get there by plane. You got to drive. It's too remote. And I'm like, that's about 15 hours, Larry. And he's like, yeah, you know, to go see that rancher. He goes, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. He goes, and he would exaggerate. He's like, you can't make an old man drive, right? And I'll go with you. And so I waited. I didn't want to drive 30 hours. And I'd see him a week or so later, and he's like, did you call? I'm like, no, you need to go. You need to go. I'll go with you. So I called, scheduled the appointment, set a date to drive 30-hour round trip. And get it all set in motion. So Larry's like, I'm not going with you. That's like 30 hours. Are you crazy? So I drove and I visited with this rancher, and he was an older individual. He was well in his 90s, almost 100. And I met with his wife, and they were asking questions about Larry. How's Larry? Let's talk about Larry. And they told me stories about how Larry interjected in their lives. And we talked about Larry. And I went back a second time. We talked about Larry in the seminary. Talked to his daughter, right? And those are the relationships that Larry had, and the ability to help me get into these families' lives. And one individual, he said, you need to go see this pastor. He was a CB pastor, and he was similar in age to Larry. And so I called the individual, and I was telling our president about this last week. He didn't want to talk to me. And he goes, let me think about it. I'm like, I just want to have coffee. And Larry says, I need to have coffee with you. And let me think about it. And I call him a week later, and he goes, okay. So we met, and I just heard his story. And he talked about the church and talked about Larry and the school. And I met with that individual again and again. He passed away a few years ago. And in death, he gave the school a legacy gift.
That's awesome.
It's a part of your pops.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's so good.
He was a masterful networker. He cared deeply. He cared deeply. And this story comes from an individual who was a pastor. His spouse had died. It was a traumatic event. And the pastor was thinking about taking his life. He was grieving deeply. And he works with Larry and talks to Larry. And they kind of walk through that grief, that tremendous loss. And then the pastor was thinking about leaving the ministry because he had thoughts of suicide. And Larry said, his response was that because of what he had gone through, that he was probably better equipped to lead than many untested leaders. And that individual stayed in ministry for a couple decades, is retired, and is still in part-time ministry. And when I think of Larry, and Larry crossing paths with that individual and keeping him on the ministry rails, he stays in ministry for decades and affects hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals because of one man. Right? And Larry was humorous. We know that. That's coming out strong. I'm going to tell you a couple quick stories about humor that you may not know. Larry had his last professional office was in our academic building, and I would go see him, and he called it like this man cave. He had a microwave, a refrigerator, coffee pot. I mean, it was a man cave before man cave became a popular thing, and it was, that's Larry. Come in, sit down, have a seat. Let's talk. Let's have some coffee. Let's have some cookies, right? And he brought people into him, right? Brought them in close. And last fall, my office was damaged, and I was moved. And I was moved into Larry's office. And I sat there at Larry's desk last fall, and I was reflecting on the stories, my interactions. And I remember praying and reflecting and just rejoicing that I had crossed paths with Larry. And in that office, there were a few other occasions where one individual had baked some cookies and shaped them like a cigar. And Larry had these cigar cookies in his office, and people would come. He would invite people in, and they would smoke the cookie cigar. And I had this vision of the conservative Baptist with a cookie, laughing, taking a puff, right? Eating a cookie, whittling it down, having coffee, right? And I find myself thinking of those stories, these stories, and sometimes you hear it like questions of, do New Testament miracles occur? Do they still occur today? And I believe they do. I believe they occur every day. And they occur in offices like Larry's, where you're able to take humor and joy, pain and trauma and questions, all of these things of life, and talk about them in ways that are meaningful, that keeps a pastor on the rails and in ministry, that sends me off as a fundraiser. And I think sacred and enters time and space through individuals like your pops.
That's good.
He was a gift to me, a gift to the institution, and we're tremendously thankful for Larry's investment in our lives at the seminary and in my life personally. So, thank you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for not wearing the spandex. Trying to get that spandex image out of my mind. I have, my sister and I were thinking of other people that we would love to have share, and there's a couple that are very well known in our church, John and Nancy Brewer. I'd like to invite them up at this time because I'm going to call them the senior cookie supplier, and definitely weekly transportation director for my dad. And are you good with this? I can lower it down a little bit and life will be good, just like that. There we go.
Thank you, Steve, for this,
Sure.
this privilege. Larry enriched our lives, and I know he enriched many of yours at the same time. And I have to just stop and say, thank you, Sue and Steve, for sharing your dad with us, and I know with so many people over so many years. We knew of Larry from the time that we were young. He often visited our church, as you've heard, in the Dalles as head of CBA of Oregon. He was a big, important man in our eyes, a man on a pedestal. It's actually because of Larry that we're members here at Grace Point. We found ourselves needing to find a new church, and we heard that Larry McCracken's son was the new pastor here at Grace Point. We visited once and never left. So Larry's influence brought us here, but it needs to be said that Steve is the one that kept us here.
In later years at this church, Larry became our dear friend. When Larry and Nancy began attending Grace Point, they claimed their favorite places to sit right in front of our favorite places to sit. That's when we began to get to know both of them better. Larry had a wonderful sense of humor. He loved to joke and tease, and he was very good at it. A friendship was slowly developing. As adults, we viewed him as simply a man on the same journey through life as the rest of us, with Jesus by our sides. And oh, how he loved Jesus.
Then came the day when Steve asked if we would be willing to pick Larry up for church now and then when needed. We said an enthusiastic yes. That eventually led to picking him up for church every Sunday. But it was a blessing. We learned a lot. Those times, it's amazing how much you can learn about a person during a short drive. One of my favorite times with Larry was when I was helping him into the car, and we had a few minutes after the service. And Steve, he still had his arm around you after your sermon, because we discussed the sermon. His wisdom really shined through, as well as his pride for Steve and how God spoke through him. His love for Jesus came through loud and clear, and he wasn't shy about checking up with others on their spiritual journey. I was often a recipient of his favorite question. Yeah, have you been in the Word today? And I appreciated that. I was very blessed by that. It helped me along my path.
He took that a step further one day when I found that I was being tested on my Bible knowledge with all sorts of questions. He laughed when I figured out what he was doing. I was never so thankful for all those Bible stories I learned in Sunday school as a child. That's where my knowledge came from. Something else we learned that seemed pretty minor was his love of cookies that Steve mentioned. But it wasn't a minor thing. He loved cookies. So began our cookie relationship and visiting him at his place. This minor thing became pretty important between us. He knew every time we visited that we wouldn't show up empty-handed. He delighted in all the different kinds of cookies he received, and he wasn't shy about letting me know which were his favorites and when he was running low. He was.
So true.
I made sure to make plenty each time so that he would have enough to share. When I told him that, he just gave me that look that said, I don't think so. Steve told me that if he wanted one, he had to sneak it. More than once, right? One day I asked Larry if he liked pies, thinking maybe he'd like a change, and who doesn't like pie? His response was, no, I'm a cookie man. So he became known as our Cookie Monster.
Well, Larry would not want any of us putting him on a pedestal. Like the Apostle Paul, Larry would say, I'm only a man like you. He was a humble man, loving, gracious, and kind. He loved to laugh, and he cared about others. But most of all, he was a Jesus lover.
Many of us know that as Larry aged and became weaker, he made it clear that he was waiting for that heaven-bound bus that's been mentioned several times today. When it arrived and he met Jesus face to face, we imagined Jesus opening his arms to welcome him home and saying, well done, Larry, well done.
Amen.
Thank you, Steve.
Well done. Thank you. And he likely asked, you want a cookie? Oh, there you have it, a 93-year-old, 93-year-long life. It's good. Seems like a long time. However, against eternity, if you think of eternity, it's a blip. That's it. King David and Moses both had psalms that said as much, asking questions out loud like, so help me know the length of my days so that I might live correctly, live properly in relationship with you, God. They both said it similarly, but you could tell here's these giants in the Bible that one of them actually used the image of a hand breadth. And I sometimes do this. Hold up your hand right now so you can all participate in this. And you got a hand breadth. I had to look it up. I didn't quite know what that meant, you know. So you got a date of birth, date of death, and the space in between, right? So I double dog dare you to tell me or tell yourself, where am I? Because if this is the beginning and this is the end, where am I on this hand breadth? So David's thoughts with the Lord led him to say, we're not here for very long. It's just a hand breadth. You walk around a cemetery, of course, you don't see a hand breadth. You see a dash, date of birth, date of death, and a dash. And can I just say, in summary of my dad, what a dash. I mean, wow, what a dash. We thought today about what God can accomplish, and I hope that's the message you'll take with you. What God can accomplish through someone whose life is touched by him and transformed and totally surrendered to him. Your time, your money, your interest, your focus, it tends to kind of circle around to Jesus. And that's really the story of my dad's life, our dad's life. Someone said to me, Larry was ready to go, but we weren't really ready for him to go. And I thought, then answered, when you know where he went, and what's ahead for him, and for all of those who know the one who touched him, we're okay. So, to be clear here at the end, according to the Bible, here's what has happened. We know that when this earthly tent we live in is taken down and discarded, I'm not going to take it all off, so relax. It's okay. It's okay. But when it's over, whether you're dressed or you're talking about a tent, you wrap it up, fold the tent, and head home. Now I'm speaking from the Bible. We know that when this earthly tent, the one we live in, is taken down, that is when we die and leave this earthly body, we will have a house in heaven, an eternal body made for us by God himself and not by human hands. Yeah, we grow weary in our present bodies, and we long to put on our heavenly bodies like new clothing. While we live in this earthly body, we groan and sigh. You can't be a 90-year-old and not have a few of those times to talk about, as my dad would agree. But it's not that we want to die and get rid of these bodies that clothe us. Rather, we want to put on our new body, get dressed in these new bodies so that the dying bodies will be swallowed up by life. God himself has prepared us for this, and as a guarantee, he's given us his Holy Spirit. Because we're talking big stuff here. These words are meant to leave you and me comforted when we groan, and we will groan, and excited about what's ahead when we, like Dad, left when we leave this life. Because of the resurrection and the promised return captured in these very tender words. I'm quoting from the New Testament. So now, dear brothers and sisters, we want you to know what will happen to believers who have died, so you will not grieve like people who grieve with no hope. Suggesting there's a difference, and indeed there is. For since we believe that Jesus died and was raised to life again, he no longer hangs on a cross or is found in a tomb. He's living, he's alive. Since we believe that, we also believe that when Jesus returns, God will bring back with him the believers who have died, like our dad. We tell you this directly from the Lord, that we who are still living, let's play it out, when the Lord returns, maybe today, we will not meet him, be face to face with him, ahead of those like Larry who have died. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven. There will be no mistaking it. There will be a commanding shout and the voice of the archangel with the trumpet call of God. And then, first the believers who've died, put anybody in that space that you know has left this life, but they belong to Jesus. And this word applies. Those who've died will rise first from their graves. Then together with them, we who are still alive and remain on the earth, and can I add this? And looking straight up at what's taking place right in front of you, will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And he finishes with these words, then we too will be with the Lord and our loved ones that love the Lord forever. So encourage each other. You don't even need these words. Encourage each other with these words. And we will then be face to face with our great God who's welcomed Dad home. And sing with, I think, everyone there. We all have our guess at what the hymns will be in heaven. but I think the one we're about to finish with is probably on the short list, How Great Thou Art. And I'd like to invite Kelly and Randy back. And I would invite you, you've been sitting for a long time, and not one complaint. I'm going to report that to my dad. But would you stand as well? Randy and Kelly are going to lead us in this great song, and let your voices jump in.
I see
the microphone next to Dad. We told you about that. But no song did he want to hear more than Carrie Underwood's How Great Thou Art. And we just got a better version of that, frankly. I'm just here to tell you. I'd like you to bow with me as I lead us in prayer and move us to some cookies and coffee. What joy will fill our hearts when you return, Lord, for all who belong to you to take us home. Until then, as we follow in the path of people like Dad, who live fully for you, show us how to live on our lives with joy and peace and hope that will be our own legacy for your glory. As Joshua followed Moses, give us strength and courage. As Elisha followed Elijah, give us a double portion, Lord. As Timothy followed Paul, help us to fulfill our ministry. And help us, Holy Spirit, to live on in this world with wisdom and righteousness and devotion to you, our God. While we look forward with hope to that wonderful day we just sang about, when you come and we sing, How Great Thou Art, our God and Savior, Jesus Christ. In your wonderful name and for your glory we praise you for my dad. Amen, amen, amen. I have some instructions for when we leave, which is now. Are you seeing it? So Dad's pretty much favorite meal is right there. That's it? Okay. And I want you to go, and I want you to go next door, and I have in my hand a little prompt. It's really small, but there are piles of these. They are actually super-sized lifesavers, and my father loved these. And I need to confess to the leadership of our church, it's why we spent so much money on these. He would take handfuls, and he would take them to where he lives, and he says, you need to come to my church. They give away mints for free. So it was a big deal to him. But many people know these mints are part of being here at Grace Point. You grab one, and then you can talk to each other and not, have a moment. But no one liked them more than my dad, and someone actually told me it's his mint-istry. I'm just saying, okay? So as we gather next door for cookie and coffee, for heaven's sake, don't forget the mint. And while you're there, would you just take a little time, tell your stories. There are cards that are there all over the tables. My favorite memory of Larry, there's a picture wall that's wonderful, and you can just walk along that and enjoy some of the many things that are part of Dad. And I want to call attention to one more as I walk down here to this table. I hope you won't file out right away. You'll make your way around and see this. My dad never owned a car like that, but that's on the table because Dad was almost always in a car as the director of CB Northwest. He traveled sometimes 100,000 miles a year. It was constant, and it was wonderful to him. He kind of lived in his car. And that's a big deal to him. You would expect this up here, but our daily bread, and this was his last one before he went home to see the bread of life face to face. And then Evie Hiskey made these incredible cookies that are appropriately with the word heaven on the side, and a bus, and that's wonderful. And of course, the bus is here too, and this is one that you can kind of move around, and it really is. And it says on the back, Larry, and on the top, Heaven Bound. So we thought you would really like some of these things and enjoy them. But I want to tell you one last thing, that his son-in-law, Caesar, Sue's husband, made a point about the bus. And I thought this was really clever. So even in the end, Dad didn't want to go to heaven on the wings of an angel. He wanted to be driven in a bus, right? So go take a picture next to the bus. Enjoy the time next door. Thank you, Vicki, for a million things you did to make this thing happen today. God bless you all.